Hello and welcome to another episode of the Strettycast. It's episode 148, I think, Shaun. So we're getting through them. The new season is almost upon us, and we have another pre-season game tomorrow against Crystal Palace, which kicks off UK time 11:10 in the morning. If you're around to watch that, we'll have a review show up shortly after the game, which we always do. But today, or tonight even, myself and Shaun are going to discuss the announcement or the arrival of Lisandro Martinez. Shaun, this one, like a lot of our targets this summer, has been a long time coming. From speaking to you earlier, you were excited about the prospect of this player coming to Manchester United. We will have the jury will be out for a while in terms of whether he can step up to the Eredivisie, or from the Premier League from the Eredivisie. But this player has already stepped up from a move to Ajax, and he's proven himself, you'd have to agree.
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is a player that I followed for some time. And, I mean, obviously he came to Ajax very, very well reportedly as kind of a replacement for Matthias de Ligt when he had left the club. So the vision with Martinez in going to Ajax was that he was going to fill that void. Now, he came to Ajax as a player, obviously from Argentina, who had started a lot of his career as a central midfielder. Now, when he arrived at Ajax, he has that defensive structure about him. And one of the biggest sort of advantages that he has is that he's tactically shrewd. So he sat in, and that was the idea, that he was going to be the new Matthias de Ligt. Then obviously the club lost Frenkie de Jong to Barcelona. It left a pretty big hole in the middle of their midfield. And it was well documented at the time that Erik ten Hag was actually quoted in saying that at the beginning of the season that they were looking for a brain for the central midfield. So they looked at Martinez. They knew that he had played in central midfield early in his career. The big questions were, could he do it in an Ajax system? Because obviously Erik ten Hag's Ajax is it's a chessboard. It's very, very regimented and very tactically shrewd. But they put him into central midfield. They tried him, and he's quoted in saying that they saw extremely good things. I mean, this is a footballer who has got so many notches on his belt, and people don't realize it, and they have to realize how strong a signing this is. I mean, I always say it that a player's key trait is his availability, and the player, he doesn't really have a track record of injuries, which is obviously a fantastic thing. But the most important thing about this player is his versatility, because he can play centre back, he can play left back, he can play centre midfield. There's a lot of focus, particularly from Sky Sports today. I couldn't believe that they did this, but Sky Sports highlighted just how short he was. I mean, I tell you, I've seen some angles that Sky Sports will go about trying to get Manchester United into an article, but my God, to have a show dedicated to how small he is, that's something else. Because you see, the thing is, they focus on his height without actually looking on any of the credible information that's behind it. I mean, this is a guy who's developed a reputation of being dominant in the air despite being 5'9". And if they actually did their homework and they looked at the statistics behind this, he led the headed clearances charts in the Eredivisie last year. And he also won 79 of 112 aerial duels. Now, this is a guy who's 5'9", and he's winning over 75% of his aerial duels, which is crazy. But what people need to realize as well, he's exceptional on the football. Now, you're talking about a guy that over his last 3 seasons has averaged over 88% passing accuracy. But as well as that, last season, he was ranked in the top 1 percentile for all defenders in terms of assists, progressive passes, successful passes, and also passes into the final third. Now, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but I saw something, and they were gauging him in terms of defenders, that this is a guy who was, I think, picked by, I know Trent was a little bit ahead of him with passes into the final third, and I believe there was one more player, but he was third in the top 5 leagues in Europe in terms of defenders with passes into the final third. And it's a guy that, because of his central midfield ability, naturally trails forward. So he likes to carry the ball out of defence, moves forward, and his distribution then just speaks for itself. This is a guy that is an extremely shrewd signing, can fill many, many holes, but ultimately, I'm crossing my fingers because everyone is viewing it as a central defensive signing. I just have this small little inkling that he's going to go in there as a number 6, and I think he could do an amazing job at it.
We will see over time. Looking at what Ten Hag said about him, he said the fans will admire him, He has an attitude, fighting spirit, and aggressiveness in the game in a good way. I think we need that. And also, he's very skillful. He can deal with the ball, and he is left-footed. Now, what I'll say about the midfield argument you're having, I think, look, I think he's coming in as centre-back. I think he's coming in to partner Harry Maguire next season, not Raphael Varane. And I'll explain that in a minute. But this season, Ten Hag has pointed out that he wanted a left-footed centre-back.
Yeah.
And I think he's one of the questions Ten Hag had coming to Manchester United, just a query he had, something he wanted to work on, was why does Harry Maguire struggle so much for Manchester United, yet play so well for England? Now, to him, that wasn't the problem with Harry Maguire. He wanted to fix that. And I think these two will complement each other pretty well. And as well as that, you look at Manchester United and the hunt for Frenkie de Jong. I think it's very clear that Ten Hag, especially in one of his recent interviews with the club, just today, he mentioned what kind of, like, the midfield kind of strategy in the market and the kind of players that they're in the hunt for. And if they didn't get Frenkie de Jong, he said, we are looking for a player who can play in the holding position. Now, you might argue Lisandro Martinez ticks that box, but it has to be the right one. There are not many in that position capable of the level we demand. We can't find him. If we can't find him, we have to deal with the players in our squad now, and we will develop one for that position. I will not react to a certain player, he said about Frenkie de Jong. We need the right player. We have a list and we qualify as the player who has the competence to play that role. We will strike the moment the player is available. Now, from those comments and what we know about Frenkie de Jong and what we don't know about Frenkie de Jong, do you think Ten Hag is still optimistic about that deal from those comments?
Well, I look at it from a couple of different ways. In terms of Frenkie de Jong, I mean, that in itself was such an open-ended conversation that he had, because it can be interpreted in so many different ways. I think with Frenkie de Jong to Manchester United in general, if you scour the internet and you want to find somebody with a take on his particular move, you'll find it. There is a different take to satisfy everybody's different desire for Frenkie de Jong to United. You've got, he doesn't want to leave Barcelona. You've got, he wants to leave, but he wants to bring his money with him. You've got, he doesn't want to go to Manchester United. You've got, he does want to go to Manchester United. And everybody has an opinion and a take on it. For me, look, it's gone on for so long. It's very hard for me to kind of fathom a world that he hasn't spoken with Erik ten Hag and told him that he would like to come to Manchester United. Yeah. And that's just the way I look at it, because, I mean, logically, that's what you'd have to come to, I suppose, acceptance with. Because if it's a situation that they have spoken and he doesn't want to come to Manchester United, then why in the name of God have they spent this time talking and trying to get it done? Now, the one thing that's really interesting, and it's why I'm talking about the possibility of him coming in, Lisandro Martinez coming in as a number 6, is what Ten Hag said himself, that they'll only go for the right player if and when he's available, they'll strike. But if he's not available, they will look at the squad, look internally, and look to develop the player. And Martinez has done that for him already in the system that he's trying to do. So that's the reason that I'm looking at that. I think he very well could partner Harry Maguire. I agree with you, because obviously ball distribution and playing out from the defence is the biggest part of his system. And for as much as Raphael Varane is a perennial winner, he is not good on the ball, and he never has been good on the ball.
He hasn't been fit enough either.
No, this is true. Like, I mean, it's as I said, what is like the most fundamental trait that any player can have is availability. And Raphael Varane, he's rivaling Erik Bailly for the amount of time that he's spending on the injury table, isn't he?
Mm-hmm. No, definitely, and that's a massive concern, I'd imagine, for Ten Hag, and probably his approach to go out and get that left-sided centre half this summer.
Definitely, yeah.
But look, if we can get more players in that are versatile and that can play a number of different roles, Ten Hag has been known to mix players around in different formations and stuff, but it's definitely beneficial to have players who can play multiple roles. You look at Frenkie de Jong, and he can play up to 3 or 4 different midfield roles. You look at Christian Eriksen, who we must also talk about in his arrival, but he comes in and he can play a number of different midfield roles. I actually reckon, as well as saying that I think Martinez will partner Harry Maguire, I think that actually might depend on what we were just talking about. If United can get De Jong in. And if they can get De Jong in, I imagine that it would be De Jong and Christian Eriksen in that double pivot next season.
I agree. Yeah, I think a huge part of this depends on another acquisition. And that double pivot is a huge thing. A huge thing. But I suppose, look, ultimately, if we can bring in Frenkie de Jong and we can complete that double pivot, we're building huge squad depth, aren't we?
Yeah.
Building huge squad depth. And I know ultimately we want to be improving the starting 11 because that's where we're really falling down. But, I mean, if we can bring in these players and increase the squad depth, then it's got to be a good thing for the club. It's actually funny that we're talking about the versatility of these players because, obviously, with the club he's coming from, it reminds me so much of Daley Blind, because he's that versatile type of player that can fill in a number of different positions. And
you would definitely like to still see him at Manchester United, wouldn't you? You've said that a few times, even before Ten Hag's arrival. You have passed comment on that.
Oh, I was very disappointed when he left. I couldn't understand it. I know that some people were trying to be really critical of him and saying that he's short and he's not so fast. But the way that he read the game, I remember the games he used to fill in as a 6 for us. He's the closest thing I think we've had to Carrick since Carrick left. Now, you might think I'm crazy with that, but it was just in his reading of the game and the way that he could pass a football. His passing of the football was exceptional. He was very, very smart on the ball.
I thought he was a good player for United. Yeah. But another point that I wanted to make about these transfers, now just kind of playing devil's advocate really, and going back to Louis van Gaal's time at Manchester United, he was renowned for targeting players that he knew. It didn't always work out for him. Now, Erik Ten Hag is doing that this summer. Some people will argue that Manchester United should listen to the manager's demands and that the board shouldn't overrule those demands. I think that opinion is heavily weighed on the fact that Ed Woodward making so many decisions in recent years. I think if we had a good football director, that there should be a balance where he's always planning for the future with or without the manager and signing the right profile of players. But I will add that with Ten Hag coming in this summer, maybe the likes of John Murto need a year to get to know what kind of profile player he wants, because I wouldn't trust their judgment right now.
No, and isn't it also been reported as well that the club had identified Pau Torres and that he overturned their decision on Pau Torres and wanted to move towards Martinez? I'm correct in saying that, aren't I?
Yeah, and most people within the game would argue that Pau Torres has a higher ceiling than Lisandro Martinez. But something that I've noticed in Pau Torres' game from the few games of Villarreal that I've watched, for someone that is quite a bit taller than Lisandro Martinez, and that if he signed, you wouldn't be hearing questions about his height, he's not the greatest jumper. I have seen him lose quite a lot of balls in the air. But Lisandro Martinez, who I haven't seen a lot of, but you've named out some really impressive statistics about his aerial presence. I have seen small players with a really good jump, and we actually had last season, we spoke to Daniel Nardiello on this podcast about which player surprised him most when he was playing that was quite small and had this like crazy jump. And he mentioned Yakubu, who played for Everton, that it was just incredible, he said, to watch him, and he was impossible to mark no matter how tall you were, and Nardiello was tall. So it's lazy reporting what we're seeing. But just back to signing players that Ten Hag knows, do you think that's a big risk?
I think that it can be a risk because, on one end, because it can be seen that he's sticking too much to his comfort zone. And I can see why people would be concerned about that because of past experiences such as Louis van Gaal. But with Van Gaal, as boring as the football was, and it was terribly boring, he was in a situation where an argument could have been made for him to get another 12 months because things were maybe starting to gel together. And when it comes to Erik Ten Hag looking at players that he knows, I mean, with who he has brought in thus far, I wouldn't think there's anything wrong with the players that he's brought in thus far. I mean, that I mean, you've got one of the highest prospects at left back. You've got a player who's not only proven, obviously, a time in Holland, but he's played in Inter, and he's also Premier League proven, and he's an international pedigree footballer who can play in a squad role and different type of positions in the field. And now you've got this versatile Argentinian that, by the manager's own words, is aggressive, but in a good way. I mean, I would not think there's anything wrong with these. And also looking towards Frenkie de Jong, I think it's just, I mean, for me with Frenkie de Jong, yes, he's played with him. Yes, it's maybe going into his comfort zone, but Frenkie de Jong is a special player. I mean, if you were looking at it in a situation where he was moving towards wanting to bring Daily Blind back, and if he was wanting to bring, you know, the striker.
Well, we had links to Brian Brobby a few weeks ago.
Young, talented footballer, lot of, and you see the different ways you can look at it. Okay, we talk in this podcast an awful lot about how we want to move away from this sort of archaic transfer strategy that we have, that we have to pay 80 million quid for a ready-proven, ready-made player, and that we should be looking at a model like Monaco or a model like Dortmund, where we can bring in really talented continental footballers and develop them. And for me, I think we can get a fine balance between both. I think we, like, the club that we are and the commercial monster that we are, there has to be sort of commercial acquisitions that can benefit sponsors. And that's the way that that's going to be. So you're always going to need a big name that you can guarantee is going to sell these shirts. Now it's going to get harder and harder and harder for United to do that if we continue to regress into complete mediocrity. But
Arsenal mode.
Yeah, and I actually saw a statistic earlier on, because it looks like they've got Zinchenko sorted out now. In the last 3 years, Arteta now is approaching nearly 400, somewhere between 400 to 500 million spent.
Hasn't finished in top four yet.
Hasn't finished in the top four yet.
Yeah, and that's something that bugs me about that statistic, that when I read up about it, I don't see it covered a lot about his failure to get into that top four. But if you go back to the shit that Solskjaer got and the shit that Frank Lampard didn't get as much as Solskjaer, but did get a bit, Arteta does not get any scrutiny whatsoever.
That's because Arteta won an FA Cup, isn't it? So he's the greatest manager ever.
It's ridiculous. Okay, he's brought in this kind of bit of a fight about Arsenal again. Players probably want to play for the shirt and that. But that's the bare minimum that a manager should be doing, really, shouldn't it? Like, if you're not getting in top four, we sack managers for that. Like, a manager we really fucking liked and that the club were desperate to see succeed was sacked this year because, you know, we weren't getting the results. And that's all part and parcel of football. It's a results business, and Ten Hag will learn that pretty soon. Looking on to the Crystal Palace game, Shaun, we have a few players that I want to talk about that haven't featured yet. So we have Garner, who we only recently learned has been injured for the past 2 games. So I'd expect he might get minutes against Palace tomorrow morning. Garnacho, we haven't seen him yet. There's been no report that he's injured. Have you been surprised about that?
I have been surprised and a small, tiny bit of apprehensive and maybe a bit worried about it based on different rumblings that I heard over the last 6 to 8 weeks. Obviously, it's well reported that the club are trying to tie him down to a long-term contract and sort of pay him a wage that is befitting of a player with his talents at his age. But that's all. It's just talks. Now, you're looking at a guy that's 17 now, 18 years of age, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's 17, is he?
17, I think.
17. If Manchester United, like, this is the club that, you know, you're cultivating your talents at, you're coming through the youth system, you want to play first team football, and the first team are offering you a gargantuan contract for a 17-year-old, you snap their hand off. But you see, it's obviously well noted as well then that his performances at underage and the fact that he's been called up to the Argentinian first team, you've got clubs like Juventus and, more worryingly, Liverpool are interested in signing him. Now, maybe it's nothing and maybe I'm just being paranoid, but I expected him to feature. And we've had 2 games against opposition that you would very much have expected him to at least get a half an hour in. He's got nothing. There's no sign of him signing that contract. And things have gone very, very quiet. And that worries me a small bit, because this is a guy I'm extremely excited about. I mean, he would appear to have the footballing world at his feet. Yet, all of a sudden, we don't see him. And as you said, there's not a mention of him being injured. But then as well, why is nobody asking the question? You know, why is no one asking, where is he? Because you should surely expect, at the very least. I mean, obviously you said about Jimmy Garner. We should hope to see him tomorrow, because he's been pictured in first team training, and so you would expect to see him tomorrow at some stage. But where is Garnacho? This is the question that I have.
No, I think it's a fair question, and even if people want to dismiss it and say, "Oh, it's only pre-season tour," you know, you're being a paranoid. I don't think you are, because this is a player in the past few weeks there's been a lot written about. I think Manchester United should be looking after this situation and making sure that he stays. Now, I don't know why he hasn't been playing. Has there been a problem with talks? What you said about Manchester United, that it's just talks, that offer hasn't been made. I am not surprised to hear that. I'm not one bit surprised to hear that. There's been a few players in recent times that haven't really known their situation with United right until the last minute. One of those players being Dylan Levitt, who was on loan at Dundee United last season, and coming up to the final few weeks of the season, it was known that he was running out of his contract. Now, Levitt didn't know about his future until the very last minute, and I think just looking at the situation for someone that has been at the club since he was 5.5, that was eager to know his role, I think that's poor form, and that's something that cannot continue if you're going to try to impress these talented kids like Garnacho. Now, look, Manchester United have vastly improved their youth system in recent years, and Phil Brown was on the podcast a few weeks ago to give a lot of credit to John Murtough for that, and that's all very encouraging. But what hasn't improved is the whole negotiation scheme, and I don't care if they get De Jong in this summer. It will be a good transfer window, but ultimately United have to improve, has to be quicker. It just has to be. Now, I'm not expecting everything to be merry overnight or over 1 year, but we have to start improving, and that might come down to dealing with these young players. You mentioned Juventus, you mentioned Liverpool. If United don't get their act together, he could easily move on a free. We've seen that with Pogba. There was a lot of United fans back then that were kind of thinking, no, he'll sign the deal, we'll sort it out. No, he left. Now, we look back at it and we're not too bothered about Paul Pogba, but the point is, the next one could be a gem.
And also, look at the Bundesliga and how teams in the Bundesliga are left, right and centre taking youth players from the top 6 teams in England because they're not getting an opportunity to play first team football, and that they're being just pried away with the offer of first team football in Germany, and they're getting it, and look how they're developing as a result of it.
Sancho.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that has to be surely he would mention are looking at that. I'm surely Ten Hag is looking at it. Well, maybe, look, Ten Hag is the manager, and maybe I don't think so, but maybe he doesn't fancy Garnacho. But no, I don't think that's the case. We'll see over the next few pre-season games if Garnacho gets minutes. But I'd be very disappointed if he doesn't feature.
Well, yeah, I'd be very disappointed if he doesn't feature as well, given everything that we discussed. But take it or leave it, the grumblings that I've got over the last 6 weeks is that teenager Garnacho has been offered a 6-year contract by the club. Now, I don't know, is that credible? I'm not going to stick my neck on the block for it.
Yeah.
But I've been told that the club have offered him a contract, and you have to ask the question why he's not snapping their hand off for it.
Okay, and that might add into the timing of why he's not being selected for games. It could possibly. Well, look, we'll see over the coming weeks how that unfolds, because that question might be asked at a press conference now you've mentioned that. We'll see who's listening. We'll see who's listening. Before we move on, we're going to wrap it up now in a minute. But what I wanted to touch on was Erik Ten Hag's recent comments about Ronaldo, saying that he's staying, he's part of the plans. He made it very clear. He said it today that Ronaldo's not going. Do you think, are you kind of a bit taken back by that, because it might potentially mess up the the whole thing that's exciting people this summer, which is Sancho, Rashford and Martial? Or do you think that for Ten Hag's best sake, it's best to have Ronaldo around for this year? Because you're not going to be able to replace him in the transfer market.
I find, particularly in a lot of podcasts, but especially in this one, I'm answering a lot of the questions with, there's two answers to this. The way I look at Ronaldo, obviously, it's not going to change. I would personally like to see him leave. And I would like to see him leave because this is a guy, for whatever reason, hasn't been able to come on the pre-season tour. He clearly wants to go. I heard grumblings today as well that Atletico Madrid was a very strong possibility for him. Now, it seems highly unlikely that Real Madrid legend Cristiano Ronaldo would go to Atletico Madrid.
Same stunt as last summer.
Yeah, I know. Look, I worry about the dressing room with Ronaldo, and we talk about it over and over again. I know it's only pre-season, and we've previously had footballers like Pereira pulling in performances where they're called pre-season Pirlo. And we've looked pretty good, so far, scoring 8 goals. There's been some good play. The young players are coming through. They're getting an opportunity. But the main thing for me, even though it's pre-season and I know the guys are having fun, is they look happy. They look happy. And from all of the reports that have come out previously about, I suppose, Ronaldo's influence in the dressing room and how it inspires these cliques and how it maybe undermines certain people like Harry Maguire at his status at the club, I just don't see it as beneficial. But then at the same time, as you touched on previously with something you said, Ten Hag knows what he wants. Ten Hag seems like a guy that gets what he wants. It's just, is there a certain point where that stops with Cristiano Ronaldo? I don't know.
Just to add in or weigh in on what you said about dressing romantics, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about it, but something that has to be considered as well is when you have these leaks, which I think a lot of the English press seem to be pinning on the Portuguese contingent of the Manchester United dressing room.
Yeah.
When you have these leaks, that just means there's other contingents in that dressing room. That's proof to me there's other problems. And if those leaks are coming out and they're aiming slide digs about Harry Maguire, that's not good. And someone can argue the fact that, if you're going to put Harry Maguire against Cristiano Ronaldo head to head, who are you going to pick? Ronaldo's the winner, Harry Maguire, some people say mediocre or whatever. I think Ten Hag needs to look at this, at what's best for the dressing room right now. And if there is have someone with that negative influence on some of the players, he needs to address that. Now, what's interesting is, Shaun, he doesn't know anything about Ronaldo yet. Ronaldo's not with the squad. So it's going to be very interesting when that does happen and what Ten Hag really makes of him. Talks about wanting to work with him, hasn't done that yet. And his opinion could change pretty soon. I think the biggest fear I have about that is, with Ronaldo delaying this return, there's not going to be much time for Erik Ten Hag to make his opinion of Cristiano. And as a player, he's not going to fault him, but as a person, there's been so many stories, I don't know what to believe anymore, to be quite honest.
Well, you say just before we finish on that topic, what people forget so much, there's managers, especially managers that are like Ten Hag now, who's after getting his dream job at one of the biggest football clubs in history, and he has an opportunity to manage one of the greatest footballers in the history of the game. And people forget this. I don't think it would necessarily be a situation where Ten Hag is looking at the squad right now and saying, we cannot function without Ronaldo. I think he's probably looking at it and he realizes this is not a Cristiano Ronaldo that's 24 years of age. It's a Cristiano Ronaldo that's nearly 38.
So he's not worried about that.
He's not worried about it, but he has the opportunity to work with him. And, and I think that's something that a lot of managers want. I mean, if you're a footballer, you want to play for a certain club. If you're a manager, you want to manage certain players, surely.
If you look back to Solskjaer, there was a lot of reporters that have claimed that he didn't know anything about the signing of Cristiano Ronaldo, but at the same time, he wasn't going to turn around to people United saying, I don't want to work with the best player of all time. You know what I mean? It's crazy. The managers want to manage the best players. But then again, you do have clubs that don't allow those transfers happen because it goes against their business model, it goes against whatever. And I think Manchester United make a lot of key decisions in the spur of the moment, rushing judgment and what would seem popular right now and what's going to please the angry fans before a season. I hope that Manchester United fans are showing signs last season what will hopefully continue with protests. I really think that should continue. I think it's important that fans keep raising their voice because a lot of the problems we've talked about over the past year still exist. Mm-hmm. They still exist. They're not going to be all fixed in 1 year, we know that. But I raise questions whether any of the promises the Glazers proposed to us after the ESL announcement will come true. They've lied time and time again, and just fingers crossed the likes of John Murtough can do a better job than Ed Woodward and actually steer the club in the right direction, because as I mentioned previously, I think Manchester United are going to quickly come to a situation where they have to run as a football club. I think they will continue to milk the commercial assets of the club, but it'll get to the stage where they can't make any more profit, which I think every football club is seeing there. That's why these owners wanted an ESL. But anyway, Shaun, any comments again about the game against Palace tomorrow you want to make before we leave it?
Just really looking forward to it. I know it's a pre-season game, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'm actually have a day off from work tomorrow, which is fantastic. So I get to watch it, and I'm just looking forward to seeing a game of football. That's all.
but I commented on, now I know it probably would have been the case anyway when the pre-season started, but because of last season and because it felt in January or whenever we got knocked out, or February when we got knocked out of the Champions League, that the season was over, especially when the player threw the towel in. But when pre-season was starting this year, I was really looking forward to it because I didn't remember really. It was months since I looked forward to a game. You know, every game we were playing so poor. It was getting to the stage we just knew the players weren't putting in the effort. We were saying it time and time again. They weren't listening. The bottomless apologies kept coming out on social media that meant nothing. But I do feel a sense of optimism because, as you touched on, Ten Hag seems to know what he wants. And look, as fans, we have to get behind the new manager and we have to show some sense of excitement before a new season.
If you can't be optimistic in pre-season, what is the point in even supporting a football team?
Look, we're going to win the league. I'm going to edit that bit out. Right, thanks so much for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the Stretty newsletter, which you can subscribe at stretty.substack.com/welcome. Thanks for listening to the podcast, and finally, thanks Shaun again for joining me.
A pleasure, man.